The late March sky hung like a gray shroud over Greenhaven Cemetery, matching the somber faces of those gathered around the small white coffin. 6-year-old Sophie Taylor's funeral had drawn nearly the entire town of Rivercrest, the collective grief palpable in the cool spring air. Robert Taylor stood motionless beside his daughter's casket, a hollow shell of the man he'd been just days before. The ceremony was nearing its end when the commotion began. A powerful German shepherd burst through the parted crowd, ignoring commands from his uniformed handler. The police K9 unit dog named Dakota raced toward the coffin with single-minded determination, causing gasps among the mourners. In one fluid motion, the shepherd leaped forward and positioned himself directly atop the small white casket, his body trembling but resolute. "Get that animal away from her," someone shouted as the K9 handler approached apologetically, leash in hand. But when he tried to remove Dakota, the dog bared his teeth, something he'd never done to his handler before. At the edge of the gathering stood a leather-clad figure, a man whose face was partially obscured by a graying beard and dark sunglasses. Jake Morgan watched the dog's behavior with growing intensity, his military-trained eyes narrowing. Something wasn't right. The dog wasn't just grieving, he was alerting. And Jake Morgan knew exactly what that meant. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Sophie Taylor had always been a bright spark of sunshine in the small town of Rivercrest. At just 6 years old, she possessed a wisdom and compassion that seemed to reach far beyond her years. With her honey blonde hair often tied in mismatched pigtails and eyes that shifted between blue and gray depending on her mood, she had a way of making everyone feel special. But beneath her cheerful exterior lay a daily struggle. Since the age of 3, when the same car accident that claimed her mother's life left her with traumatic brain injury, Sophie had battled with epilepsy. The seizures came unpredictably, stealing moments of her childhood with each episode. Yet somehow she maintained an unwavering optimism, especially when it came to animals. "Animals don't look at you funny when you fall down," she once told her father. "They just wait for you to get back up." Robert Taylor had been a respected veterinarian before tragedy struck his family. At 42, the premature streaks of silver in his dark hair and the deep lines around his eyes told the story of a man who had aged decades in just 3 years. After losing his wife, Jennifer, Robert closed his practice, unable to bear the constant reminders of how they'd built it together. He devoted himself entirely to Sophie's care, working from home as a medical transcriptionist between her doctor appointments and hospital stays. The medical bills had mounted, along with the constant fear that one day a seizure might take his daughter too. His hands, once steady enough for delicate surgeries, now often trembled when he helped Sophie with her medication. One day at a time, he'd whisper to himself each morning, his wife's favorite saying becoming his desperate mantra. Dakota came into their lives as a broken creature, a German shepherd puppy discovered with fractured ribs and cigarette burns, evidence of unimaginable cruelty. And then there was Jake Morgan, a man whose rough exterior concealed unexpected depths. With his weathered leather jacket covered in motorcycle club patches and arms bearing faded military tattoos, Jake cut an intimidating figure. Few in Rivercrest knew that the gruff biker was actually Jennifer Taylor's estranged brother, a former Army combat medic whose path to self-destruction after service had cost him his family connections. Even fewer knew about the incident that sent him to prison, assaulting Dr. Mark Peterson after the physician refused emergency treatment to a child from the wrong side of town. The day that changed everything dawned crisp and clear, exactly 3 years after Jennifer Taylor's death. Robert had been dreading the anniversary for weeks, watching Sophie grow quieter as the date approached. The ritual they'd established involved visiting Jennifer's favorite hiking trail in the Appalachian foothills, where wildflowers painted the landscape in her favorite colors. This year, Sophie had insisted on bringing a small bouquet of hand-picked dandelions because they're strong enough to grow anywhere, just like Mommy said I am. They parked at the familiar trailhead, Robert checking Sophie's medical bag, twice extra medication, emergency contact information, her specialized cushioned helmet for unexpected falls. The path wound gently upward through oak and hickory trees just beginning to unfurl their spring leaves. Sophie skipped ahead occasionally, never quite out of Robert's watchful sight. They reached the outlook point where Jennifer had once loved to photograph sunsets, and Robert helped Sophie arrange her dandelions in a small cairn of stones. "Daddy, did you hear that?" Sophie suddenly asked, her head tilting to one side. Robert shook his head, hearing only the rustle of leaves and distant birdsong. But Sophie was already moving, drawn towards something only she could perceive. Robert followed anxiously, calling for her to slow down. When he caught up, he found his daughter kneeling beside a fallen log, speaking in the gentle voice she reserved for frightened creatures. "It's okay," she was whispering. "We won't hurt you." At first, Robert saw nothing. Then a slight movement revealed the source of Sophie's concern, a German shepherd puppy, no more than 3 months old, wedged beneath the rotting wood. The animal's fur was matted with mud and blood, one hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Most disturbing were the circular burns visible where fur had been seared away from skin, deliberate, cruel marks that made Robert's stomach turn. "Daddy, he's hurt bad," Sophie said, tears welling in her eyes. "Like I was after the accident. We have to help him." Robert's veterinary instincts took over. He carefully assessed the puppy male, severely dehydrated, multiple injuries, but miraculously still alive. Using his jacket to create a makeshift carrier, he gently wrapped the trembling animal. The dog didn't struggle or bite, instead fixing Sophie with an intense gaze that seemed to hold recognition. "He knows we're helping him," Sophie said with absolute certainty. "I'm going to name him Dakota. It means friend in Native American." "Actually, sweetheart, it's a bit more complicated than that," Robert began, then stopped himself. "Dakota is perfect." The closest animal hospital was closed for renovation, so Robert drove instead to Blue Ridge Animal Sanctuary. He donated his veterinary equipment there after closing his practice, and knew the director, Dr. Sarah Williams, would help without question. The sanctuary sat nestled against the foothills, its sprawling property hosting everything from abandoned farm animals to injured wildlife. Sarah met them at the entrance, her experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation. "Bring him straight back," she directed T, leading them through the main building to a well-equipped examination room that Robert recognized it contained many of his former instruments. Multiple fractures, dehydration, malnourishment, and these burns. Sarah's voice hardened as she gently examined Dakota. "Someone did this deliberately. We'll need to report it." While Sarah prepared for x-rays, Sophie sat beside the examination table, talking softly to Dakota despite Robert's concerns about hygiene and potential aggression. The puppy's eyes never left the little girl, and when Sarah attempted to separate them for the procedure, Dakota whimpered until Sophie was allowed to remain in sight. "I've never seen anything quite like this bond, especially with a dog that's been abused," Sarah remarked. "They usually don't trust humans at all after what he's been through." The rehabilitation process would be lengthy. Dakota required surgery for his broken leg, antibiotics for infection, and specialized care for the burn wounds. When Sarah gently suggested they consider leaving the puppy at the sanctuary, Sophie became uncharacteristically stubborn. "He needs me," she insisted, small hands clenched into determined fists. "And I need him too." Robert recognized the expression on his daughter's face. It was Jennifer's look, the one that had always signaled an immovable decision. He arranged to cover Dakota's medical expenses in installments and committed to bringing Sophie for daily visits during the puppy's recovery. Those visits quickly became the highlight of Sophie's life. She would sit reading books aloud to Dakota while he healed, smuggling in treats despite the strict dietary regimen. Robert watched in amazement as his daughter's seizure frequency diminished during these visits. The change was subtle at first, a day without an episode, then 3, then a full week. Sophie's neurologist was cautiously optimistic, noting that emotional support animals sometimes created measurable improvements in patients with neurological conditions. What truly astonished both Robert and the sanctuary staff developed in the 3rd week of their visits. Sophie had been sitting beside Dakota's kennel when her body suddenly stiffened, the telltale sign of an oncoming seizure. Before Robert could reach her, Dakota was already responding, despite his healing leg. The puppy pressed against the kennel door until it opened, then positioned himself against Sophie, barking sharply until Robert arrived. The seizure that followed was milder than usual, and Sophie recovered more quickly. "That dog knew before any of us," Sarah said afterward, reviewing the sanctuary security footage. "Look at the timestamp. He started acting differently almost 2 minutes before her clinical symptoms appeared." Further observation confirmed it wasn't coincidence. Dakota displayed consistent alerting behaviors before Sophie's seizures: restlessness, specific vocalizations, and physical positioning that allowed Sophie to safely lie down before the seizure struck. Without formal training, Dakota had become something precious, an early warning system that gave Sophie precious minutes to prepare. "There are specialized programs for epilepsy service dogs," Sarah explained to Robert one evening. "But they cost upwards of $20,000, with waiting lists of several years. What you've found here is extraordinary." As Dakota healed physically, his bond with Sophie deepened into something that transcended typical human-animal relationships. The abused puppy, who should have feared humans, instead developed an uncanny attunement to Sophie's medical needs. For her part, Sophie blossomed in her role as Dakota's protector, her confidence growing as she helped with his physical therapy exercises. "He was broken and now he's getting better," she told her father seriously. "Just like me." Robert watched them together, recognizing something he couldn't quite articulate, a connection that seemed fated rather than accidental. When Dakota was finally cleared for adoption, the decision was already made. The German Shepherd puppy who had survived deliberate cruelty would go home with the little girl who had survived devastating loss. Neither of them was whole, but together they created something complete. The call from Rivercrest Police Department came 6 months after Dakota had become part of the Taylor family. Chief Michael Wilson explained that their K-9 unit had been observing Dakota during Sophie's therapy sessions at the rehabilitation center where the department volunteered. The shepherd's natural alerting abilities, intelligence, and temperament had impressed the K-9 trainer so much that they wanted to discuss a proposition with Robert. "We're not trying to take him away from your daughter," Chief Wilson explained as they sat in the Taylors' modest living room. Dakota lay protectively at Sophie's feet, his eyes tracking the unfamiliar visitor. "What we're proposing is a partnership program. Dakota would receive professional training, enhancing his natural abilities, and he would work part-time with our department. The rest of the time he would remain Sophie's companion." Robert glanced at Sophie, who was absently running her fingers through Dakota's fur. "I don't understand. He's a rescue with a traumatic history." "Don't you usually start with purpose-bred puppies?" Officer James Lowry, the department's K-9 trainer, nodded respectfully. "Typically, yes, but Dakota has demonstrated exceptional qualities. His ability to alert to Sophie's seizures without formal training suggests an extraordinary sensitivity. We believe he could excel in detection work, particularly in finding missing persons or in medical alert scenarios." The financial aspects of the proposal were compelling. The department would cover all of Dakota's veterinary expenses, provide professional training valued at thousands of dollars, and pay a monthly stipend that would help with Sophie's medical bills. In return, Dakota would work 20 hours a week with the K-9 unit after completing his training. "What about his time with Sophie?" Robert asked, his protective instincts flaring. "Her seizures can happen any time." "We've thought about that," Chief Wilson replied. "We've arranged with Dr. Williams at the sanctuary to develop a specialized training schedule that accommodates Sophie's school hours and medical appointments. Dakota would primarily work when Sophie is in school, and we'd ensure he's available during her highest risk periods." Sophie, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. "Would Dakota get a police badge? And one of those special vests?" Officer Lowry smiled, crouching down to her level. "He would indeed. He'd be an official police K-9 with his own badge number. And you could attend his graduation ceremony when he completes training." The prospect lit up Sophie's face momentarily before doubt clouded her expression. "But what if I have a big seizure and he's working? What if I need him and he's not there?" It was the question Robert had been afraid to articulate. For months, Dakota had been Sophie's guardian, often alerting before seizure struck, positioning himself to cushion her falls and staying with her throughout each episode. The thought of Dakota being absent during a critical moment sent a chill through Robert's heart. Despite his reservations, Robert recognized the opportunity this represented. Sophie's medical expenses had been steadily mounting, and the specialized pediatric neurologist in the neighboring county, their best hope for improved seizure management, didn't accept their insurance. The financial support from the K-9 program could make that specialized care possible. After extensive discussion and careful consideration, they agreed to a trial period. Dakota began training with Officer Lowry 3 mornings a week while Sophie was at school. The shepherd proved to be an exceptional student, mastering commands and scenarios that typically took other dogs months to learn. The trainers marveled at his ability to switch between professional alertness during training sessions and gentle attentiveness when reunited with Sophie. "He understands the difference between his jobs," Officer Lowry explained, watching Dakota transform from focused police dog to therapeutic companion the moment Sophie appeared. "It's like he has 2 distinct sides to his personality, each perfectly suited to its purpose." As Dakota progressed through his training, Sophie's condition took a worrying turn. The seizures that had decreased in frequency during Dakota's arrival in their lives began to intensify again. The episodes grew longer, more severe, and increasingly resistant to her medication. Robert found himself making weekly trips to the emergency room, holding his daughter's small hand while doctors administered rescue medications to stop seizures that wouldn't end on their own. "We need to adjust her treatment plan," Dr. Henderson, Sophie's longtime neurologist, explained during yet another follow-up appointment. "The EEG showing increased activity in the temporal lobe. I'd like to refer her to Dr. Eliza Montgomery at Children's Memorial. She specializes in complex pediatric epilepsy cases." Robert's heart sank as he reviewed the referral paperwork. Children's Memorial was a 3-hour drive away, and Dr. Montgomery, as he had feared, was out of network for their insurance. The initial consultation alone would cost more than a month of his salary. "Is there any other option?" Robert asked, hating the desperation in his voice. Dr. Henderson's expression softened with genuine regret. "For routine epilepsy management, yes. But Sophie's case is becoming increasingly complex. Dr. Montgomery pioneered a diagnostic protocol specifically for cases like hers, where standard treatments aren't providing adequate seizure control. I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't believe it was necessary." That night, after Sophie had finally fallen asleep with Dakota vigilant beside her bed, Robert sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills, insurance statements, and denial letters. The house that he and Jennifer had purchased with such hope now felt like it was collapsing around him. The roof needed repairs, the heating system was failing, and now Sophie needed specialized medical care they couldn't afford. The K-9 program stipend helped, but nowhere near enough for the mounting expenses. In desperation, Robert called Sarah Williams at the sanctuary to discuss increasing Dakota's training hours for additional compensation. Sarah listened sympathetically, then made a suggestion that took Robert by surprise. "The K-9 graduation ceremony is next month, and it's a significant community event. Local businesses donate quite generously to the program. With your permission, I could speak to Chief Wilson about highlighting Sophie and Dakota's story. A fundraiser coordinated with the ceremony might generate enough support for Sophie's treatment." The idea of publicly showcasing his daughter's medical struggles made Robert deeply uncomfortable. Jennifer had always been fiercely protective of Sophie's privacy. But facing the alternative of denying her potentially life-changing medical care, he reluctantly agreed. The weeks leading up to Dakota's K-9 graduation ceremony were a blur of preparations. Local news outlets picked up the story of the abused rescue dog who had become both a devoted service animal to a child with epilepsy and a promising police K-9. Sophie was interviewed for the school newspaper, proudly explaining how Dakota could smell seizures before they happen. Officer Lowry arranged for Sophie to present Dakota with his official K9 vest during the ceremony, an honor that had her practicing her part every evening before bed. The day of the ceremony dawned bright and clear. The police department's training field had been transformed with rows of folding chairs, a podium decorated with the American flag, and a display table showcasing photographs of the graduating K9 teams. Sophie wore her favorite blue dress with butterflies embroidered along the hem, her hair carefully braided by Mrs. Chen from next door. Dakota had been professionally groomed, his coat gleaming in the morning sunlight as Officer Lowry put him through final practice runs. The ceremony began with the chief's welcome address, followed by a demonstration of each graduating dog's specialized skills. When Dakota's turn came, he performed flawlessly, locating the hidden training items and responding to Officer Lowry's commands with precision that drew appreciative applause from the audience. Robert sat in the front row beside Sophie, his chest tight with conflicting emotions, pride in Dakota's achievements and anxiety about the fundraising appeal that would follow. As Dakota's demonstration concluded, Officer Lowry called Sophie to the presentation area. She walked forward carefully, carrying the specially sized K9 vest with Dakota embroidered alongside the police insignia. The audience fell silent as the small girl solemnly presented the vest to Officer Lowry, who helped her place it on Dakota. The shepherd stood perfectly still, his posture somehow conveying dignity despite the flashing cameras and murmuring crowd. And now Officer Lowry announced Dakota would like to demonstrate his most important skill, the one that inspired our department to welcome him into our K9 program. This was the moment they had planned. Dakota would perform a seizure alert demonstration with a training volunteer, showcasing the ability that made him exceptional. But as Sophie turned to walk back to her seat, Dakota suddenly stiffened, his attention locked onto her with an intensity that Robert recognized immediately. "Sophie," Robert called out, already rising from his chair, but it was too late. In front of hundreds of witnesses, Sophie's body went rigid, her eyes rolling back as she collapsed onto the grassy field. Dakota broke formation before anyone could react, positioning himself beneath Sophie's falling body and barking the specific alert he had developed for her most severe seizures. The demonstration had become horrifyingly real. What followed was a blur of activity, Officer Lowry radioing for the paramedic station nearby as a precaution, Robert administering Sophie's emergency medication with shaking hands, Dakota refusing to leave her side even as medical personnel arrived. The seizure didn't respond to the initial rescue medication, continuing with an intensity that left Sophie's lips tinged blue. "We need to transport now," the lead paramedic decided, efficiently transferring Sophie to a stretcher. Rivercrest General is 7 minutes out. As they loaded Sophie into the ambulance, Dakota attempted to follow, straining against Officer Lowry's grip. The shepherd's distress was palpable, his alert barks continuing even as the ambulance doors closed. In that moment, Robert made a split-second decision. "Let him come," he told Officer Lowry, already climbing into the ambulance. "She needs him." The ceremonial K9 vest was hastily removed as Dakota leaped into the ambulance, immediately positioning himself as close to Sophie as the paramedics would allow. Throughout the frantic journey to Rivercrest General, as Sophie's seizure continued beyond the 15-minute mark that constituted status epilepticus, but Dakota maintained his vigilant attention, occasionally making eye contact with Robert, as if to communicate shared concern. They arrived at the hospital to find the emergency department already alerted to their situation. Dr. Mark Peterson, the attending physician, barely glanced at Dakota as they transferred Sophie to a treatment room. "No dogs in the ed," he stated firmly, pointing toward the waiting area. "Hospital policy." Robert began to protest, but a nurse intervened, recognizing Dakota's specialized role. "He's her seizure alert dog, Dr. Peterson. We've been instructed to make accommodations for service animals." With visible reluctance, Peterson allowed Dakota to remain, though he insisted the dog stay on the far side of the treatment room. As the medical team worked to stabilize Sophie, whose seizure had finally begun to subside under the influence of stronger medications, Robert found himself watching Dakota intently. The shepherd's behavior had shifted from alert to watchful, his eyes never leaving Sophie's face. What none of them realized in that chaotic moment was that this seizure marked the beginning of the most challenging chapter in their journey, one that would test the limits of science, medicine, reveal unexpected connections, and ultimately demonstrate the extraordinary bond between a broken girl and the dog who refused to let her go. The fluorescent lights of Rivercrest General Hospital's emergency department cast harsh shadows across Sophie's pale face as the medical team worked to stabilize her condition. Dr. Mark Peterson moved with clinical efficiency, barking orders for medication dosages and diagnostic tests while barely acknowledging Robert's presence. 6 hours after admission, Sophie's seizure activity had finally ceased, but she remained unconscious, her small body connected to an alarming array of monitoring equipment. "We've administered 3 rounds of anti-seizure medications," Dr. Peterson explained, reviewing charts without making eye contact. "The seizure has stopped, but she's not regaining consciousness at the rate we would expect. We'll need to run an EEG to assess brain activity and check for potential damage from prolonged seizure activity." Robert stood at his daughter's bedside, one hand resting protectively near hers, the other absently stroking Dakota's head. The shepherd had maintained a quiet, watchful presence throughout the emergency, his behavior impeccable despite the chaotic environment. "This isn't her first serious seizure," Robert explained. "Her recovery time varies, but she usually starts responding within a few hours." Dr. Peterson's expression remained impassive as he made another notation in Sophie's chart. "Mr. Taylor, status epilepticus seizures lasting over 30 minutes can cause significant neurological damage. Your daughter seized for nearly 45 minutes before we achieved control. We need to prepare for the possibility that this episode was qualitatively different from her previous experiences." The bluntness of Peterson's assessment hit Robert like a physical blow. He glanced down at Dakota, drawing strength from the dog's steady presence. "Dr. Henderson has been managing her epilepsy since she was 3. I'd like him consulted on her case." "Dr. Henderson is out of town at a conference," Peterson replied dismissively. "I've reviewed her records and I'm fully capable of managing her care. Now I need to check on other patients. A nurse will be in shortly to take her for the EEG." As Peterson left the room, Robert noticed Dakota's attention shift from Sophie to the doctor, the shepherd's posture subtly changing as he tracked Peterson's movement. It was the same alertness he displayed when encountering something potentially threatening during his K9 training, not aggression, but heightened awareness. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of diagnostic tests, hushed consultations in hallways just beyond Robert's hearing, and the constant, maddening beeping of monitoring equipment. Dakota remained a steadfast sentinel, but permitted to stay by Sophie thanks to his official K9 status and the intervention of a sympathetic nurse who brought him water and arranged a small bed beside Sophie's. Shortly after midnight, Robert dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, only to be startled awake by Dakota's soft whine. The shepherd had risen to his feet, attention fixed intently on Sophie. Robert immediately checked the monitors, which showed no change, then studied his daughter's face. Her color seemed different, a subtle grayish tinge beneath the pallor. "Nurse," Robert called, pressing the call button repeatedly. "Something's wrong, please. Someone come check on her." The night nurse arrived quickly, assessed Sophie's vital signs, and immediately paged the on-call physician. Within minutes, the room filled with medical personnel. Robert found himself pressed against the wall, Dakota at his side, as doctors issued rapid-fire orders. The monitor alarms began to sound in discordant chorus as Sophie's oxygen levels plummeted. "For respiratory arrest," someone called out, starting resuscitation protocol. Robert watched in horror as they placed a breathing tube down his daughter's throat, attaching it to a ventilator that began the rhythmic work of breathing for her. A doctor he hadn't seen before, the overnight attending, performed a quick neurological examination, shining a light into Sophie's unresponsive eyes and testing her reflexes. "Page Dr. Peterson," the attending instructed a nurse. "He's following this case and wanted to be notified of any changes." 20 agonizing minutes later, Peterson arrived, his scrubs looking freshly changed despite the late hour. He reviewed the new test results with the attending physician in low voices before approaching Robert. "Mr. Taylor, your daughter's condition has deteriorated significantly," Peterson stated. "The EEG shows minimal brain activity and she's now requiring ventilator support. These findings, combined with her failure to respond to stimuli, indicate severe neurological compromise." "What are you saying?" Robert asked, his voice barely audible. "I'm saying that the prolonged seizure appears to have caused catastrophic brain damage. We'll continue supportive care and monitoring, but you should prepare yourself for the possibility that she won't recover meaningful neurological function." Peterson delivered this devastating assessment with clinical detachment, already turning back toward the nurse's station. "Wait," Robert called, desperation edging his voice. "There must be something else we can do, specialists we can consult, treatments we haven't tried." Peterson sighed, checking his watch. "Mr. Taylor, I understand this is difficult to accept. We're providing standard of care for this condition. Given our limited resources and the severity of the damage, transfer to a specialized facility would be futile. The kindest thing now is to focus on comfort measures and begin considering end-of-life decisions." Robert stared at the doctor in disbelief, unable to process the suggestion that he should prepare for Sophie's death. "She's 6 years old," he said numbly. 6. "You can't just tell me to give up on her." "I'm not suggesting you give up," Peterson replied, an edge of impatience creeping into his tone. "I'm giving you my medical assessment based on 30 years of experience. Your daughter has suffered catastrophic neurological injury. Modern medicine has its limitations." Throughout this exchange, Dakota had grown increasingly agitated, pacing between Sophie's bed and the door, whining softly in a pattern that Robert recognized from the dog's seizure alerts. Observing this behavior, Robert felt a surge of resolve cut through his shock. "I want a second opinion," he stated firmly. "And I want her transferred to Children's Memorial to Dr. Montgomery's service. She specializes in complex pediatric epilepsy cases." Peterson's expression hardened. "Mr. Taylor, that's not a reasonable request. First, Children's Memorial is nearly 3 hours away. Your daughter is not stable enough for transfer. Second, their specialized services would be wasted on a case with such a poor prognosis. Third, as I understand it, your insurance doesn't cover treatment there." "I don't care about the insurance," Robert insisted. "We'll figure that out. Sophie deserves every chance. Even if I approved the transfer, which I won't, their ethics board would likely decline to accept a case with such minimal prospects for recovery. It would deprive other children of resources that could actually help them." Peterson's tone had taken on a patronizing quality that ignited a spark of anger in Robert's grief. "You don't know my daughter," Robert said, struggling to maintain his composure. "She's overcome every obstacle thrown at her since the accident. She deserves more than being written off after one examination." Peterson checked his watch again, making no effort to hide his impatience. "I'll order another EEG for morning, but I don't expect the results to change. Try to get some rest, Mr. Taylor. The nurse can provide you with a cot." After Peterson left, Robert sank back into the visitor's chair, overwhelmed by helplessness. Dakota approached, resting his head on Robert's knee in a gesture of solidarity. The shepherd's eyes held a depth of understanding that broke through Robert's composure, and he finally allowed himself to weep, one hand clutching Sophie's limp fingers, the other buried in Dakota's fur. By morning, Sophie's condition remained unchanged. The follow-up EEG confirmed Peterson's assessment: minimal brain activity, insufficient to maintain basic functions without support. As the day progressed, various medical personnel came and went, their expressions shifting from professional concern to barely concealed pity when they thought Robert wasn't watching. Around noon, Officer Lowry arrived, bringing fresh clothes for Robert and food for Dakota. The K-9 trainer took in Sophie's condition with quiet gravity, settling a supportive hand on Robert's shoulder. "The whole department's pulling for her," Lowry said simply. Chief Wilson's asking if there's anything we can do fundraising for specialists, arranging transportation, whatever you need. Robert explained Peterson's refusal to consider transfer and his dismissal of further treatment options. As he spoke, he noticed Lowry's expression change, a flash of recognition crossing his features at Peterson's name. Peterson, Lowry repeated thoughtfully. Tall guy, about 60, kind of silver-haired. Always looks like he's smelling something bad. Robert nodded, surprised by the accurate description. Thought so, Lowry continued, his voice lowered. There's history there. About 5 years back, Jake Morgan, you know. That biker who runs the Veterans Outreach Program. He assaulted Peterson in the hospital parking lot. Got 18 months for it. Story around town was that Peterson had turned away a kid from the trailer park who needed emergency care insurance issues or something. The kid ended up with permanent complications. Jake lost it when he found out. The information settled uncomfortably in Robert's mind, adding another dimension to Peterson's dismissive attitude. Before he could respond, the door opened again to admit a young neurologist who introduced herself as Dr. Amara Singh, explaining she was consulting on Sophie's case at the request of the hospital administration. Dr. Singh reviewed Sophie's tests and examined her thoroughly, paying careful attention to pupillary responses and subtle reflex reactions that Peterson had seemed to overlook. Throughout her examination, Dakota watched intently, his behavior markedly different than during Peterson's visits, calmer, less agitated. "Mr. Taylor, Doctor." Singh said finally, "I'd like to order additional testing, a more comprehensive EEG with provocation protocols and specific autonomic response measurements." Dr. Peterson's assessment focuses on cortical activity, but there are deeper brain functions we should evaluate before making definitive prognoses. For the first time in 24 hours, Robert felt a faint glimmer of hope. Will Dr. Peterson approve these tests? He seemed convinced that further intervention would be futile. Dr. Singh's expression remained professionally neutral, but her eyes conveyed understanding. As consulting neurologist, I can order these tests independently. I've already discussed it with the chief of medicine. The additional testing consumed most of the afternoon. Robert remained by Sophie's side, drawing strength from Dakota's unwavering presence and Officer Lowry's quiet support. As evening approached, Dr. Singh returned, her expression grave but not hopeless. "The additional tests show something interesting," she explained, displaying complex readouts on her tablet. "There's minimal typical cortical activity, which is what Dr. Peterson focused on. However, we're seeing preservation of autonomic functions and some subcortical responses that suggest the damage may be less catastrophic than initially assessed. It's possible we're dealing with a profound post-ictal state rather than irreversible damage." "What does that mean for Sophie?" Robert asked, clinging to each word. "It means we shouldn't rush to pessimistic conclusions," Dr. Singh replied carefully. "I'd recommend continuing supportive care and considering transfer to a pediatric neurology center for more specialized evaluation once she's stabilized for transport. Dr. Montgomery at Children's Memorial would be ideal, given her expertise in complex epilepsy syndromes." Hope flickered briefly before reality intervened. Dr. Peterson said she wasn't stable enough for transfer, and insurance won't cover treatment at Children's Memorial. Dr. Singh seemed to choose her next words with precision. "As for stability, I believe she could be safely transported with appropriate medical support. Regarding insurance coverage, that's unfortunately outside my purview, but perhaps the hospital social worker could discuss options with you." Their conversation was interrupted when Dr. Peterson entered, clearly displeased to find Dr. Singh present. "I wasn't informed about these additional tests," he said tersely, reviewing the results displayed on her tablet. "Chief of Medicine approved the consult," Dr. Singh replied evenly. "Given the patient's age and the complexity of her condition, a second neurological opinion was deemed appropriate." Peterson dismissed her findings with a curt nod. "Interesting academic observations, but they don't change the fundamental prognosis. Mr. Taylor, I've discussed your daughter's case with our ethics committee. Given her condition and poor prospects for recovery, we're recommending transitioning to comfort care only." The clinical euphemism for giving up struck Robert like a physical blow. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Dr. Singh just said there are signs that the damage might not be as severe as you thought." "Dr. Singh is offering false hope based on anomalous readings," Peterson countered. "I've been practicing medicine since before she entered medical school. The reality is that continuing aggressive intervention only prolongs the inevitable and causes unnecessary suffering." The debate might have continued, but it was interrupted by a sudden flurry of alarms from Sophie's monitors. Her heart rate plummeted as the ventilator alarm blared. Dr. Singh rushed to Sophie's bedside, calling for emergency medications as her condition deteriorated rapidly. "She's crashing," Singh called out, already beginning chest compressions. "Get the crash cart." The next 45 minutes passed in a nightmarish blur of resuscitation efforts. Robert found himself pressed against the wall once again, holding Dakota's collar as the medical team fought to restart Sophie's heart. When they finally stepped back, expressions grim, Dr. Peterson turned to face Robert. "Time of death 7:42 p.m., he stated, making a notation in Sophie's chart with finality. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Taylor. We did everything possible, but her injuries were too severe." Robert stared in disbelief, unable to process the words as Dr. Singh checked Sophie's pupils one final time and quietly confirmed Peterson's pronouncement. Dakota, who had remained unnaturally still throughout the crisis, suddenly began to whine, not the alert pattern Robert had come to recognize, but a low, mournful sound that broke something essential inside him. "Would you like some time with her?" a nurse asked gently, already beginning to disconnect the monitoring equipment. "We can remove the breathing tube and make her comfortable for you to say goodbye." Robert nodded numbly, watching as they transformed his vibrant, resilient daughter into a too-still form beneath hospital blankets. When they had finished, he approached her bedside, Dakota following silently at his heels. He reached for Sophie's hand, still warm but terrifyingly motionless, and realized with crushing finality that the unthinkable had happened. Despite every promise he had made to protect her since Jennifer's death, Sophie was gone. 3 days later, the community of Rivercrest gathered at Greenhaven Cemetery to say their final goodbyes to Sophie Taylor. The March morning had dawned overcast but dry, the muted sunlight filtering through clouds that matched the somber mood of the assembled mourners. Greenhaven occupied a gentle hillside overlooking the town, its carefully maintained grounds dotted with mature oak trees that had witnessed generations of grief and remembrance. Robert Taylor stood beside his daughter's white coffin, scarcely recognizing the man reflected in its polished surface. The past 72 hours had passed in a haze of paperwork, phone calls and arrangements, all conducted with the mechanical precision of someone moving through a nightmare. The funeral home director had been kind but efficient, guiding Robert through decisions no parent should ever have to make: the smallest casket in their catalog, the selection of a burial plot near Jennifer's grave, the wording for an obituary that attempted to encapsulate a 6-year-old's unfinished life. Pastor Williams from the community church approached the podium set up beside the gravesite, his well-worn Bible open in his weathered hands. The elderly minister had baptized Sophie as an infant and had been a steady presence through Jennifer's funeral 3 years earlier. Now he surveyed the gathered mourners, nearly 200 strong, many carrying small stuffed animals or colorful pinwheels that Sophie had loved, and began the service with a gentle prayer for comfort. "Friends, neighbors, family," Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "we come together today bearing a burden that feels too heavy to carry: the loss of a child. Sophie Elizabeth Taylor brightened our community for 6 short years with her courage, her kindness, and her extraordinary spirit." As the pastor continued, Robert remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the small white coffin adorned with a spray of wildflowers collected from the hiking trail where they had found Dakota. The dog had not been permitted to attend the service. The funeral director had gently but firmly explained their policy against animals at graveside ceremonies. Dakota remained at the police K-9 facility under Officer Lowry's watchful care, the shepherd reportedly refusing food since Sophie's death. At this time, Pastor Williams announced Sophie's father would like to share some words of remembrance. Robert moved to the podium like a man walking underwater, every step requiring conscious effort. He unfolded the paper where he had attempted to distill his daughter's essence into words, then set it aside unused. "My daughter," he began, his voice barely audible before gaining strength, "loved to collect stones. Not valuable ones, just ordinary pebbles that caught her attention. She'd find one on a walk or at the playground and bring it home, insisting it was special. Her room has jars full of these treasures rocks that most of us would step over without noticing." He paused, drawing a steadying breath. "After her mother died, Sophie told me something I'll never forget. She said, 'Daddy, people are like my rocks. They all have something special, but sometimes you have to look really carefully to see it.' At 6 years old, she understood something many adults never learn, that value isn't always obvious, that everyone deserves a second look." Throughout the cemetery, quiet weeping could be heard as Robert continued. She saw the special something in Dakota when he was broken and abandoned. She saw it in her classmates who others overlooked. And she saw it in me, even when grief made me a shadow of the father she deserved. His voice threatened to break, but he pressed on. "Sophie fought against limitations from the day she was born. Her epilepsy never defined her, it was just a part of her story, not the whole book. She faced every challenge with a courage that humbled me daily. The world is dimmer without her light. But I know she would want us to keep looking for the special something in others, to keep collecting those overlooked treasures that make life meaningful." As Robert returned to his place beside the coffin, Mrs. Chin, Sophie's favorite neighbor who had taught her to fold origami cranes, began singing Amazing Grace, her clear soprano voice carrying across the hillside. The assembled mourners joined in, creating a melody that seemed to rise and fall with the gentle breeze rustling through the oak trees. Near the back of the gathering, partially obscured by a large memorial stone, stood a solitary figure. Jake Morgan had arrived as the service began, keeping a respectful distance from the main assembly. His leather jacket was zipped against the March chill and dark sunglasses concealed his eyes, but nothing could hide the rigid tension in his posture as he watched the proceedings. Few of the mourners noticed his presence, fewer still recognized him as the estranged brother of Jennifer Taylor, the uncle Sophie had never known. As the hymn concluded, Pastor Williams invited the mourners to place their small tributes, the stuffed animals, pinwheels, and hand-drawn cards from Sophie's classmates, in a special basket that would remain with the family. The solemn procession had just begun when a commotion near the cemetery entrance disrupted the ceremony. Officer James Lowry was hurrying up the gravel path, visibly distressed as he approached Robert. Following close behind him, straining against a police-issue leash, was Dakota. The German shepherd's focused intensity was palpable even from a distance. This was not the behavior of a dog who had broken training, but rather one responding to an imperative beyond human understanding. "I'm so sorry," Lowry whispered urgently to Robert. He broke through 2 secured doors at the facility. "When I tried to contain him," Lowry gestured to a torn sleeve and what appeared to be a minor defensive wound on his forearm. "He's never shown aggression before. I thought maybe he should be here. Ready to say goodbye." Robert nodded mutely, too emotionally exhausted to object. The funeral director approached with a concerned expression, prepared to enforce the no animals policy, but something in Robert's devastated face stopped him from intervening. "Just for a moment," Robert requested quietly. He was her protector. He deserves to say goodbye too. With reluctant permission granted, Lowry cautiously released the tension on Dakota's leash. The shepherd paused, scanning the assembled mourners before his gaze locked onto Sophie's coffin. With purposeful steps, Dakota approached the small white casket, his movements deliberate and measured as mourners parted to create a path. Upon reaching the coffin, Dakota did something unexpected. Rather than merely sniffing or circling the casket as Lowry had anticipated, the shepherd hoisted himself up, placing his front paws on the edge of the coffin before gracefully pulling his body atop it. There he settled, sphinx-like, his intelligent eyes scanning the shocked faces of the mourners before coming to rest on Robert with an intensity that seemed to communicate across the species barrier. "Sir," the funeral director began, moving forward with obvious discomfort, "I'm afraid we can't allow." "Wait," Robert interrupted, something in Dakota's behavior capturing his full attention. This wasn't grief as he had expected the mournful whining or restless circling the dog had exhibited at the hospital. Dakota's posture was alert, his ears forward, body tense with the same vigilant attention he displayed when monitoring Sophie for seizure activity. From his position near the back of the gathering, Jake Morgan removed his sunglasses, his experienced eyes narrowing as he observed the German Shepherd's behavior. 20 years as a combat medic had taught him to recognize patterns that others missed, and something about Dakota's posture triggered a professional memory he couldn't immediately place. "He's not grieving," Jake murmured to himself, drawing a curious glance from a nearby mourner. "That's an alert posture." The funeral director was growing increasingly distressed, gesturing for Officer Lowry to remove the dog. "Mr. Taylor, please, this is highly irregular. We need to proceed with the service." Robert barely heard him, transfixed by Dakota's behavior. The shepherd had begun making a soft, rhythmic whining sound, not the mournful keening of grief, but the distinct pattern Robert had come to associate with Sophie's seizure alerts. "He's alerting," Robert whispered, a terrible, impossible hope beginning to form. Why would he alert if? His words were cut short as Dakota suddenly barked sharply the specific vocalization he used only for Sophie's most severe seizures. The one that meant immediate intervention was necessary. The sound echoed across the hillside cemetery, startling a flock of mourning doves from a nearby oak tree. "Get that animal under control," the funeral director demanded, his professional composure finally cracking. "This is completely inappropriate." Officer Lowry moved forward to retrieve Dakota, but the shepherd growled low in his throat, a warning that stopped the K-9 officer in his tracks. This wasn't the behavior of a dog who had broken training. This was calculated resistance from an animal convinced his mission was vital. "Something's wrong," Lowry said quietly to Robert. "I've never seen him act like this, not even during the most intensive protection training." At the back of the gathering, Jake Morgan was moving forward, his mind finally connecting Dakota's behavior to memories from his military service. During his deployment, he had worked alongside medical detection dogs trained to alert to subtle physiological changes in patients, changes often imperceptible to human observers. "The dog's alerting," Jake called out, pushing through the startled mourners. "Someone needs to check." "Sir, please return to your place," the funeral director interrupted, gesturing for cemetery staff to intervene. "We're in the middle of a service." Jake ignored him, continuing his approach until he stood before Robert. Looking up close, the family resemblance was unmistakable, the same determined set of the jaw that Jennifer had possessed, the same intensity in his eyes. "You don't know me," Jake began, his gruff voice softened with urgency, "but I was a combat medic. That dog is displaying the same alerting behavior as our medical detection canines. He's not grieving, he's trying to tell us something." Robert stared at the stranger, desperate hope battling with protective anger. "My daughter is gone," he said, each word painful. "The doctors confirmed it. What are you suggesting?" Dakota barked again, more insistently, his eyes never leaving Robert's face. "I'm suggesting," Jake replied steadily, "that dogs can detect physiological changes we can't perceive. In Afghanistan, we had a retriever who could alert to subtle breathing changes in comatose patients when all our equipment showed no signs of life." The funeral director stepped between them, professional patience exhausted. "Gentlemen, I must insist that we proceed with the service. This is neither the time nor place for." "Open the coffin," Jake interrupted, his voice carrying across the now silent gathering. A collective gasp rose from the mourners, followed by murmurs of shock and disapproval. Pastor Williams moved forward, his expression concerned but kind. "Sir, I understand grief takes many forms, but this isn't appropriate." Let's allow Sophie the dignity of a peaceful rest." Jake turned to Robert, ignoring everyone else. "I know how this sounds. I know what everyone's thinking. But that dog," he pointed to Dakota, still maintaining his alert posture atop the coffin, "is trained to detect things we can't. Something's triggering his alerts, and we need to know what." Robert stood frozen between impossible hope and the fear of deepening his trauma with false expectations. Dr. Singh's words from the hospital echoed in his memory about autonomic functions and subcortical responses that Peterson had dismissed, about not rushing to pessimistic conclusions. And "Robert," Officer Lowry said quietly, "I've never seen Dakota give a false alert. Not once in all his training. Whatever he's sensing, it's real to him." The funeral director stepped forward, visibly alarmed. "Mr. Taylor, I cannot permit the disturbance of casket contents once they've been prepared for interment. It violates state regulations and professional protocols." Something hardened in Robert's expression, the same determination that had appeared when doctors suggested abandoning treatment options for Sophie's epilepsy years earlier. "That's my daughter," he said simply. And if there's even the slightest chance, he couldn't finish the sentence, the possibility too fragile to voice aloud. A new voice entered the conversation, Dr. Amara Singh, who had arrived late to the service and now pushed her way through the bewildered mourners. "As the consulting neurologist on Sophie's case, I support examining her condition," she stated with professional authority. "There were anomalous findings in her final tests that warrant verification." The funeral director looked from Robert to Dr. Singh to Dakota, who maintained his alerting posture with unwavering focus. "This is completely unprecedented," he protested weakly. "So call the police," Robert replied, a spark of his former self returning. "Oh, wait, they're already here." He gestured to Officer Lowry and the other uniformed officers who had attended to honor Dakota's connection to their K-9 unit. Chief Wilson stepped forward from among the officers. "Under the circumstances, I believe we have reasonable cause to request emergency medical evaluation," he stated formally. "I'll take full responsibility for the decision." The next few minutes unfolded with surreal intensity. The funeral director reluctantly stepped aside as Officer Lowry radioed for emergency medical services. Jake Morgan quickly explained his military medical background to Dr. Singh, who listened with professional interest rather than dismissal. Dakota remained positioned atop the coffin, his alerting behavior continuing with undiminished urgency. "The nearest ambulance is 8 minutes out," Lowry reported. "But we can't wait." He turned to Chief Wilson. "Sir, with your permission, we should check now." Wilson nodded grimly. "Do it." With careful reverence, Lowry and another officer approached the coffin. Dakota shifted his position to allow access while maintaining physical contact with the casket lid. The officers gently opened the secured latch that had been prepared for final closure following the ceremony. As the lid was raised, a collective hush fell over the gathering. Sophie lay peacefully arranged against white satin, looking as if she were merely sleeping in her favorite blue dress with butterfly embroidery. To the untrained eye, nothing appeared amiss, which made the dog's continued alerting all the more confounding. Jake moved forward with professional efficiency, his years of medical training overriding the bizarre circumstances. He pressed 2 fingers gently against Sophie's neck, his expression concentrated. For several heartbeats, no one spoke, the entire assembly holding their collective breath. When Jake looked up, his face had transformed. "I'm detecting a pulse," he announced, his voice steady despite the extraordinary claim. "It's faint and slow, maybe 10 or 12 beats per minute, but it's there." Dr. Singh immediately joined him, confirming his finding with her own examination before quickly checking Sophie's pupils with a small penlight from her purse. "Minimal pupillary response, but present," she reported. "This is consistent with profound cataleptic state, not death." Robert swayed on his feet, overwhelmed by emotions too complex to name. "She's alive?" he whispered, afraid to believe it. "But the hospital, the death certificate." "Catalepsy is extremely rare but documented," Dr. Singh explained rapidly, already initiating basic life support measures. Vital signs can be suppressed to levels undetectable by standard hospital monitoring. Without specialized tests, it can be mistaken for death. Dakota had jumped down from the coffin, positioning himself at Sophie's side with the focused attention he displayed during her seizures. The shepherd's behavior now made perfect sense. He hadn't been grieving now. He had been alerting to subtle physiological signs that human senses and standard medical equipment had missed. In the distance, sirens announced the approaching ambulance. Chief Wilson was already coordinating with dispatch, explaining the unprecedented situation and requesting immediate helicopter transport to Children's Memorial Hospital. The funeral gathering had transformed into an emergency medical scene, mourners stepping back to create space while remaining rooted in place, unwilling to leave until they knew Sophie's fate. Through it all, Jake Morgan remained beside Sophie, monitoring her faint vital signs with the practiced calm of a combat medic accustomed to extraordinary circumstances. When he finally looked up at Robert, the family resemblance was unmistakable, the same determination, the same unwillingness to surrender to conventional wisdom when instinct suggested another path. "You're Jennifer's brother," Robert said quietly, recognition dawning through his emotional turmoil. Jake nodded once, his focus returning immediately to Sophie. "We'll have time for that later. Right now, your daughter needs advanced medical care immediately. The cataleptic state has likely protected her brain from oxygen deprivation, but we need to get her to specialists." As the paramedics arrived and began transferring Sophie to emergency transport, Dakota remained vigilant, refusing to leave her side even as they loaded her into the ambulance. Officer Lowry didn't attempt to restrain him this time. "He goes with her," Robert insisted, and no one argued. Standing on the hillside as the ambulance departed with lights flashing and siren wailing, the assembled mourners remained motionless, trying to process the extraordinary event they had witnessed. Funeral had become rescue, grief had transformed to tentative hope, and the community's understanding of death itself had been profoundly challenged. Pastor Williams finally broke the stunned silence, his weathered face reflecting a mixture of shock and wonder. "In all my years," he said quietly, "I've never seen anything like this. I believe we've just witnessed something truly extraordinary, not just a medical anomaly, but a testament to the bond between a child and her protector. Perhaps," he added thoughtfully, "we should transform this gathering from a funeral into a prayer circle for Sophie's recovery." As the mourners reorganized around this new purpose, Jake Morgan found himself approached by Chief Wilson, whose expression reflected professional concern rather than judgment. "You're aware there's a warrant out for your arrest," Wilson said quietly, stating rather than asking. "Parole violation from the Peterson incident." Jake nodded once, no regret in his expression. "I know, but I couldn't stay away from my niece's funeral." Wilson studied him for a long moment before responding. "Well, I seem to have misplaced my handcuffs today. Strange coincidence. And I expect the paperwork processing your arrest might take unusually long, perhaps long enough for a judge to consider the circumstances of your violation." He glanced toward the departing ambulance. "You should go to the hospital. Your family needs you." As Wilson walked away, Jake stood motionless on the hillside, watching the ambulance disappear around a bend in the road. After 15 years of self-imposed exile from his family, after prison and regret and purposelessness, a German shepherd's inexplicable devotion had created the possibility of redemption, not just for Sophie, but perhaps for him as well. The somber procession of emergency vehicles wound its way through Rivercrest's narrow streets, sirens piercing the peaceful afternoon as townspeople stopped to stare. Inside the lead ambulance, paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize Sophie Taylor's fragile vital signs while Robert knelt beside the gurney, one hand holding his daughter's motionless fingers, the other resting on Dakota's head. The German shepherd remained unnaturally still, eyes fixed on Sophie's face with unwavering vigilance. "BP's dropping again," one paramedic called to her partner. "Oxygen saturation at 83%. Robert watched helplessly as they adjusted equipment and administered medications, medical terminology washing over him in an incomprehensible wave. Dr. Singh, who had accompanied them from the cemetery, monitored Sophie's pupillary responses with clinical focus. "Her condition is deteriorating," Singh explained quietly to Robert. "The cataleptic state likely preserved brain function initially, but she's been without proper medical support for nearly 3 days. We need to get her to advanced care immediately." The ambulance radio crackled with updates. The emergency helicopter was delayed by mechanical issues, and the backup air transport was 20 minutes out at minimum. Sophie didn't have 20 minutes. "Children's Memorial is sending their specialized transport team," the dispatcher's voice announced through static, "but estimated arrival is 35 minutes. Dr. Singh's expression tightened. "She needs comprehensive life support now. Rivercrest General is our only immediate option." Robert's grip on Dakota's fur tightened involuntarily. "Not there," he said, his voice raw. "Not with Peterson. He's the one who pronounced her dead without proper testing." "Mr. Taylor," Singh countered gently, "I understand your concern, but your daughter's condition is critical. Rivercrest has equipment we need to stabilize her for transport. We don't have time for alternatives." The ambulance turned sharply onto Hospital Drive, its siren cutting off as they approached the emergency entrance, where a medical team already waited, alerted by radio to the unprecedented situation. Among them stood Dr. Peterson, his silver hair gleaming under the ambulance bay lights, his expression a carefully composed mask of professional concern. As the doors swung open and the gurney was pulled out, Peterson stepped forward, assuming command with practiced authority. "Take her to Trauma 1, he directed the team. "I want full cardiac monitoring, intubation trays ready, and the ventilator prepped. Dr. Singh, I'll need a complete briefing on your field assessment." Robert climbed out of the ambulance, Dakota at his heels. The shepherd's demeanor had changed, a low growl rumbling in his chest as Peterson approached. Before anyone could intervene, Jake Morgan appeared, having followed the ambulance in his motorcycle. "I suggest you step back from this case, Peterson," Jake said, his voice carrying the edge of barely controlled fury. "You've already made one catastrophic error with this child." Peterson's gaze flicked dismissively over Jake before returning to the medical team, transferring Sophie through the automatic doors. "Security, please remove this individual from the treatment area. And get that dog out of my emergency department immediately." Two security guards moved forward uncertainly, clearly recognizing Jake's imposing figure and reputation. Before the situation could escalate, Chief Wilson arrived, badge in hand. "Dr. Peterson," Wilson said evenly, "given the extraordinary circumstances, I'm requesting that Dr. Singh maintain primary responsibility for Sophie Taylor's care, with consultation from the pediatric specialists en route from Children's Memorial." Peterson's expression hardened. "This is my emergency department, Chief Wilson. I appreciate your concern, but medical decisions remain under physician authority, not law enforcement." Actually interjected a new voice. "In cases of potential medical negligence, administrative oversight can establish alternative care protocols." All heads turned to see Dr. Eleanor Winters, Rivercrest General's chief of medicine, striding purposefully through the automatic doors. In her late 60s, with steel gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Winters carried the gravitas of 4 decades in medicine. "Dr. Peterson," she continued crisply, "please provide Dr. Singh with all necessary resources, then report to my office immediately. Dr. Singh will coordinate with the Children's Memorial team until their arrival." Peterson's face flushed with barely suppressed anger. "With all due respect, Dr. Winters, I've been managing this department for 15 years. This situation is being driven by emotional reactions rather than medical evidence." "The evidence," Winters replied coolly, "is currently being rushed to Trauma 1 with vital signs that contradict your signed death certificate. I believe that warrants administrative review at minimum." She turned to Robert. "Mr. Taylor, please proceed to the family waiting area. Dr. Singh will provide updates as they become available." As Peterson stalked away and the medical team disappeared with Sophie into the treatment area, Robert found himself guided to a small, private waiting room adjacent to the emergency department. Dakota remained pressed against his leg, the shepherd's alerting behavior finally subsiding as Sophie received proper medical attention. Jake Morgan hesitated at the waiting room doorway, clearly uncertain of his place in this family crisis. Robert looked up, really seeing his brother-in-law for the first time. "You should stay," he said simply. Jake nodded once, taking a seat on the opposite side of the small room, his weathered hands clasped between his knees. The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken history and shared concern for Sophie. "Jennifer tried to find you," Robert finally said. "After Sophie was born, she wanted you to meet your niece." Jake's gaze remained fixed on the floor. "I was in no shape to meet anyone back then. Especially not a baby," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "When I got back from my last deployment, I wasn't right. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop seeing things. The VA diagnosed PTSD, prescribed pills that made everything worse. Jennifer deserved better than watching her brother self-destruct." Robert absorbed this, connecting puzzle pieces of family history Jennifer had shared in fragments over the years. The incident with Peterson, that wasn't just random. No, Jake's jaw tightened. "I was at the VA outpatient clinic when a woman rushed in with her son, maybe 5 years old, high fever, struggling to breathe. Peterson was covering the emergency intake that day. He turned them away, said they needed to go to the county facility across town because their insurance wouldn't cover treatment at Rivercrest. I tried to intervene. Explained the kid needed immediate care. Peterson had security remove me from the building." He paused, shame evident in his expression. "I followed him to the parking lot. Lost control. By the time they pulled me off him, I'd broken his nose and 2 ribs. The kid ended up with permanent lung damage from delayed treatment of bacterial pneumonia." Before Robert could respond, the waiting room door opened to admit Dr. Singh, her expression grave as she took a seat across from them. "Sophie's condition is critical but stabilized," she explained. "We've initiated comprehensive life support and corrective measures for the metabolic imbalances resulting from prolonged catalepsy. The specialized pediatric transport team from Children's Memorial will arrive within 15 minutes to continue her care during transfer." "Will she recover?" Robert asked, the question barely audible. Dr. Singh's professional composure softened with compassion. "Mr. Taylor, I need to be completely honest with you. While Sophie's brain was partially protected by the cataleptic state, she has sustained significant damage from oxygen deprivation. The extent won't be fully clear until comprehensive neurological assessment at Children's Memorial. But you should prepare for the possibility of severe impairment." The word struck Robert with physical force. After the miracle of discovering Sophie alive, after the rush of desperate hope, reality crashed down with crushing weight. His daughter might survive, but as a shadow of the vibrant child she had been. "What does that mean exactly?" he managed to ask. "It means," Dr. Singh explained gently, "that while her basic life functions might be preserved, higher cognitive functions, speech, movement, memory, learning may be severely compromised. Some patients in similar situations require lifetime supportive care." Dakota whined softly, sensing Robert's distress. The shepherd pressed closer, offering wordless comfort, as he had so many times before. "There are also significant legal and ethical questions arising from this situation," Dr. Singh continued carefully. "The erroneous death certificate, the decisions leading to premature funeral arrangements, these constitute major departures from standard medical protocols." Jake's expression darkened. "Negligence, you mean? Or worse?" Dr. Singh neither confirmed nor denied this characterization. "The hospital administration is already initiating a comprehensive review. In the meantime, our priority remains Sophie's care and successful transfer to Children's Memorial." As if summoned by her words, the door opened again to admit a nurse. "The pediatric transport team has arrived. They're preparing for immediate transfer." What followed was a blur of activity, Sophie being moved to a specialized transport gurney equipped with comprehensive monitoring systems. The Children's Memorial team conferring with Dr. Singh about medication dosages and ventilator settings, paperwork being completed for emergency transfer of care. Throughout the controlled chaos, Dakota remained a steady presence beside Robert, occasionally glancing toward the treatment room where Sophie lay. When the moment came to move Sophie to the waiting helicopter, Robert found himself walked through protocols by a compassionate but firm transport nurse. "I'm afraid animals cannot accompany patients during air medical transport," she explained, eyeing Dakota. "It's a strict safety protocol." Robert looked down at the shepherd who had saved his daughter's life, who had recognized what advanced medical equipment and experienced physicians had missed. The thought of separating them seemed fundamentally wrong. "He's a trained K-9 officer and medical alert dog," Robert argued, a desperate edge to his voice. "He detected her condition when everyone else failed." "I understand, Mr. Taylor," the nurse replied with genuine sympathy, "but helicopter protocols don't allow exceptions, even for service animals. The cabin space is extremely limited, and every pound affects flight dynamics." Chief Wilson, who had been coordinating with hospital security throughout the crisis, stepped forward. "I can arrange police escort for you and Dakota to Children's Memorial. You'll be less than 30 minutes behind the helicopter." As the medical team prepared to wheel Sophie toward the helipad, Dakota suddenly strained against Robert's grip on his collar, whining urgently. The sound was familiar, the specific alert pattern that preceded Sophie's most severe seizures. "Wait," Robert called out, causing the medical team to pause. "Dakota's alerting something's wrong." Dr. Singh immediately returned to Sophie's side, checking monitors and vital signs. "Her oxygen saturation is dropping," she announced, urgency replacing her calm demeanor. "We need to adjust ventilator settings before transport." The specialized pediatric team moved with practiced efficiency, making rapid adjustments to equipment and administering medication through Sophie's IV line. Throughout their intervention, Dakota maintained his alert posture, only relaxing when the monitors showed improvement in Sophie's condition. "Your dog just prevented a potential crisis during transport," the Children's Memorial physician acknowledged, genuine respect in his voice. "That's remarkable." As they prepared once again to move Sophie, the devastating reality of the situation settled over Robert like a physical weight. His daughter had been incorrectly declared dead. She had been prepared for burial while still alive. And now, even if she survived, she faced potential lifelong disability due to medical negligence. The miracle of finding her alive now gave way to the tragedy of what had been lost, what might have been prevented with proper care. As the transport team wheeled Sophie toward the waiting helicopter, Robert felt Jake's hand on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of shared grief and the long, uncertain road ahead. The pediatric intensive care unit at Children's Memorial Hospital operated with a quiet efficiency that belied the critical nature of its work. 3 days had passed since Sophie's dramatic rescue and emergency transfer. Robert Taylor had barely left his daughter's bedside, sleeping in the uncomfortable recliner provided for parents, eating only when the compassionate nursing staff insisted. Dakota had been granted unprecedented access to the hospital through a specially arranged exception, the hospital administration recognizing both his role in saving Sophie's life and his continued ability to alert to subtle changes in her condition before monitoring equipment detected problems. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, director of the Pediatric Neurology Department and the specialist they had originally sought before Sophie's crisis, had taken personal charge of her case. In her early 50s, with prematurely silver hair and kind eyes behind stylish glasses, Montgomery projected the rare combination of clinical brilliance and genuine compassion that characterized the truly exceptional physician. "Mr. Taylor," she began, settling into a chair beside Robert during her morning rounds, "I'd like to discuss Sophie's comprehensive assessment results with you. We've completed extensive neurological testing, including specialized EEG monitoring and functional response evaluations." Robert straightened, bracing himself for what he assumed would be confirmation of the worst-case scenario Dr. Singh had outlined. Jake Morgan, who had become a fixture in the waiting room despite the awkwardness of his situation with law enforcement, stood in the doorway at Robert's request. "Sophie's condition is highly unusual," Dr. Montgomery continued, opening the thick file containing test results. The cataleptic state she experienced is extremely rare, particularly in children. In reviewing her medical history, I believe this may be connected to her underlying epilepsy condition rather than being solely a result of the prolonged seizure, as was initially assumed. She turned several pages of technical data before continuing. What's most remarkable is the pattern of neurological activity we're observing. While certain regions show significant compromise from oxygen deprivation, others demonstrate remarkable preservation of function. In particular, the areas responsible for basic consciousness, sensory processing, and emotional recognition appear largely intact. Robert leaned forward, afraid to hope. What exactly does that mean for her recovery? It means, Montgomery replied carefully, that Sophie's prognosis is significantly better than initially estimated. We're already seeing indications of awareness, subtle responses to familiar voices, particularly yours, and, interestingly, reactions to Dakota's presence. While she's not yet regained consciousness in the conventional sense, these are promising signs. For the first time in days, Robert felt something other than fear and grief. So she might wake up, be herself again? Dr. Montgomery's expression remained professionally measured. Recovery from this type of neurological event is never straightforward, Mr. Taylor. Sophie will likely face significant challenges, possible motor deficit, speech difficulties, and cognitive issues requiring extensive rehabilitation. But yes, I believe she has the potential for meaningful recovery, particularly given her age and the remarkable neuroplasticity of the developing brain. As the physician continued explaining rehabilitation options and next steps, Jake Morgan shifted his position in the doorway, his attention caught by movement in the corridor. Through the small window in the door, he observed a man in a business suit conversing with a hospital administrator, occasionally glancing toward Sophie's room. Something in the man's demeanor, the practiced solemnity, the leather portfolio clutched like a shield, triggered Jake's instinctive wariness. "Excuse me," he interrupted politely, addressing Dr. Montgomery. "There's someone in the hallway who seems interested in this room. Hospital security issue, maybe?" Montgomery glanced toward the door, her expression hardening slightly. "That's not security. That's Gerald Whitman, the hospital's legal counsel." She returned her attention to Robert. "Mr. Taylor, I should inform you that Rivercrest General has initiated contact with our administration regarding Sophie's case. They've requested access to our diagnostic findings and treatment records." Robert's momentary hope curdled into anger. They're worried about liability, about covering for Peterson's mistake. Legally, they're entitled to request information relevant to a patient transferred from their facility, Montgomery explained carefully. However, as Sophie's father and legal guardian, you have significant control over what information is shared and how it's used. Before Robert could respond, his cell phone vibrated with an incoming call from an unfamiliar local number. He excused himself to answer in the corridor, stepping past the hovering legal counsel with a curt nod. "Mr. Taylor, this is Amanda Reeves from the Rivercrest Chronicle," a brisk female voice announced. "I'm calling regarding your daughter's situation. We've received information about potential medical negligence at Rivercrest General, and I was hoping you might comment on." "How did you get this number?" Robert interrupted, shock giving way to defensive anger. "And how do you know about my daughter's situation?" "We have sources within the hospital system," Reeves replied, professional but not unsympathetic. "Mr. Taylor, this story is going to break with or without your input. Dr. Peterson has been involved in similar controversies before, and our research suggests a pattern of negligent treatment, particularly involving patients with complex conditions or insurance complications." Robert ended the call without responding, his mind racing. Returning to Sophie's room, he found Jake and Dr. Montgomery in quiet conversation, their expressions grave. "The hospital lawyer wants to speak with you," Jake explained. "I suggested he make an appointment through proper channels rather than lurking in hallways." Dr. Montgomery closed Sophie's file with deliberate care. Mr. Taylor, I should inform you that we've received inquiries from several news outlets regarding Sophie's case. Patient confidentiality prevents us from sharing any information without your explicit consent, but you should be prepared for potential media attention as word spreads. It's already spreading, Robert confirmed, relating the call from the Chronicle reporter. How is this happening? Who would leak confidential medical information? Jake's expression darkened with understanding. Someone with an agenda. Someone who knows Peterson's history and wants it exposed. As if summoned by the conversation, a hospital administrator appeared at the door, expression apologetic. Dr. Montgomery, there's an urgent situation requiring your attention in the conference room. The Rivercrest General representatives are insisting on an immediate meeting with their legal team. Montgomery rose with evident reluctance. Mr. Taylor, I'll return as soon as possible. In the meantime, please limit visitors to family only. I've instructed the nursing staff to redirect any unauthorized persons, particularly those identifying themselves as journalists. After she departed, Robert sank back into the chair beside Sophie's bed, overwhelmed by this new complication. Dakota, who had been resting in the corner of the room, approached to rest his head on Robert's knee in a gesture of silent support. This is becoming a circus, Robert said quietly to Jake. Sophie needs peace and stability for recovery, not media attention and legal battles. Jake remained silent for a moment, his weathered face troubled. There's something you should know, he finally said. Something about Peterson and why this situation might be escalating so quickly. He moved to close the door fully before continuing. After I was arrested for assaulting Peterson, there was a nurse, Caroline Mills, who contacted my public defender. She wanted to testify that Peterson had a history of providing substandard care to certain patients, particularly those with complex conditions or limited insurance. She had documentation incident reports she'd filed, patient outcomes that were questionable. Robert straightened, fully attentive now. What happened? Nothing. 2 days before the hearing, she withdrew her offer to testify. Took a new position at a hospital in Oregon. My defender tried to subpoena her, but by then the trial date was moved up and it all happened too quickly. Jake's expression hardened with old anger. I always suspected Peterson or the hospital administration had pressured her to leave. You think someone at Rivercrest knows about this history? That they're leaking information to force the issue into the open? Jake nodded slowly. The hospital has new administration since then. Maybe someone found Mills' old reports. Maybe Peterson has made other mistakes that were covered up. Whatever the reason, Sophie's case has become the catalyst for something bigger. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. A young nurse entered, checking Sophie's vital signs with practiced efficiency before turning to Robert. Dr. Montgomery asked me to inform you that she's delayed in the administrative meeting but will return as soon as possible. Also, she added more hesitantly, there's a police officer in the waiting area asking to speak with Mr. Morgan. He says it's regarding a parole violation. Jake's expression remained impassive, though his shoulders tensed visibly. I should deal with this, he said to Robert. Been expecting it since the funeral. Before either man could respond further, Dakota suddenly lifted his head from Robert's knee, attention shifting to Sophie with the focused intensity they had come to recognize as an alert. The shepherd moved to the bedside, whining softly in the pattern that preceded Sophie's seizures. Get Dr. Montgomery, Robert instructed the nurse urgently. Dakota's alerting something's changing. The nurse moved quickly to the door, but hesitated at a sudden sound from the bed, a soft moan, barely audible above the mechanical hum of monitoring equipment. Robert turned to find Sophie's eyelids fluttering, her fingers twitching against the white hospital sheets. Sophie? He whispered, afraid to trust what he was seeing. Sweetheart, can you hear me? Her eyes opened, partially unfocused at first, then gradually settling on his face. Recognition flickered across her features, not full awareness, but undeniably present. Her lips moved, forming what appeared to be Dakota's name, though no sound emerged. The room erupted into activity as the nurse called for assistance and Dakota continued his alert behavior, now interspersed with excited movement. Jake stepped back to make space for the medical team rushing in, his own legal troubles momentarily forgotten in the face of this breakthrough. Dr. Montgomery arrived minutes later, slightly breathless from her hurried return. She conducted a rapid neurological assessment, speaking softly to Sophie while testing basic responses and reflexes. When she finally stepped back, her professional composure couldn't quite mask her genuine amazement. "This is remarkable progress," she told Robert. "Sophie is demonstrating purposeful responses and clear recognition. While she's not fully conscious in the conventional sense, she's significantly more responsive than our earlier assessments indicated was possible at this stage." "What changed?" Robert asked, still holding Sophie's hand, which now weakly curled around his fingers. "Why now?" Montgomery glanced at Dakota, who had settled into a vigilant but calmer posture beside the bed. "I can't explain it medically. The brain's recovery processes aren't linear or fully predictable, particularly in cases as unusual as Sophie's. But I've learned over my career not to discount factors outside our current scientific understanding, including the profound impact of emotional connections and sensory recognition." As the medical team continued their assessment, Jake quietly stepped into the corridor to confront his legal situation. He found Officer Miller, a junior member of the Rivercrest Police Department, looking distinctly uncomfortable with his assignment. "Chief Wilson sent me," Miller explained in a low voice. "He wanted you to know that Judge Gardner has reviewed your case given the unusual circumstances. She's ordered a temporary stay on the parole violation warrant pending review of new evidence regarding your intervention at the funeral." Jake's expression revealed nothing, though tension visibly drained from his posture. "Evidence?" "Video from multiple sources showing your medically appropriate actions that saved a child's life," Miller replied with the hint of a smile. "Chief said to tell you the legal wheels turn slowly, but sometimes in the right direction." As Miller departed, Jake returned to find the room transformed. The administrative tension and legal concerns had been temporarily eclipsed by the simple, profound miracle of Sophie's emerging consciousness. Robert sat beside the bed, tears streaming unchecked down his face as he spoke softly to his daughter, recounting Dakota's heroism at the funeral. "He knew, Sophie," Robert whispered, voice thick with emotion. "When everyone else thought you were gone, Dakota knew you were still here. He wouldn't leave you." Sophie's fingers twitched in response, her gaze shifting slowly from her father to the German shepherd, watching her with intense focus. Her lips moved again, and though no sound emerged, the shape was unmistakable. "Good boy." In that moment, as medical staff documented vital signs and neurological responses, as legal questions loomed unanswered in administrative offices, as media representatives gathered in the hospital lobby seeking confirmation of extraordinary rumors, one truth became crystalline in its clarity. The bond between this child and her canine protector had transcended medical understanding, institutional protocols, and even the presumed boundary between life and death itself. The seasons turned as Sophie Taylor's recovery progressed, spring blossoms giving way to summer heat, then the rich colors of autumn in the Appalachian foothills. The journey was neither swift nor straightforward, marked by setbacks and breakthroughs that tested the resilience of everyone involved. Throughout it all, Dakota remained a constant presence, his alerting abilities becoming an integral part of Sophie's medical care protocol. 6 months after what the townspeople of Rivercrest had come to call the miracle at Greenhaven, Sophie sat in her wheelchair on the back deck of the Taylor home, bundled against November's chill as she worked through speech therapy exercises with painstaking determination. Her progress had defied the initial conservative prognoses. While she still struggled with fine motor coordination and complex speech, her cognitive functions had largely returned, preserved by what Dr. Montgomery described as a perfect neurological storm of protective factors. "That's excellent," Sophie encouraged Melissa Chin, the speech therapist who visited 3 times weekly. "Let's try that sentence more." Dakota saved me, Sophie formed carefully, each word requiring conscious effort but emerging with growing clarity. He knew I was still here. Dakota, resting beside the wheelchair in his working vest, raised his head at the sound of his name, ever attentive to Sophie's needs. The shepherd had adapted seamlessly to his dual role, continuing limited K-9 duties with the Rivercrest Police Department while serving as Sophie's full-time medical alert companion. The arrangement had become a model program, with Chief Wilson showcasing it to other departments across the state as an example of innovative service animal deployment. Inside the house, Robert Taylor sat at the kitchen table with Jake Morgan and Sarah Williams from the Animal Sanctuary, reviewing documents spread before them. The legal and medical aftermath of Sophie's case had unfolded dramatically over the preceding months, culminating in today's development. The settlement agreement includes a non-disclosure clause regarding the specific terms the Taylor family's attorney had explained earlier that morning. However, it provides comprehensive coverage for all of Sophie's past and future medical expenses, rehabilitation costs, and educational accommodations through college age. Additionally, Rivercrest General has agreed to implement significant protocol changes for patients with complex neurological conditions. What the attorney didn't need to explain was that the hospital's eagerness to settle stemmed directly from the extensive investigation triggered by Sophie's case. Dr. Peterson had been placed on administrative leave pending review, which revealed a troubling pattern of rushed diagnosis and substandard care for patients with complicated conditions. Caroline Mills, the nurse who had attempted to report these issues years earlier, had provided sworn testimony from her new position in Oregon, vindicated at last by the institutional changes now being implemented. The paperwork for the foundation is almost complete, Sarah explained, organizing a folder of legal documents. Once the 501c3 status is approved, Sophie's Angels can begin formal operations. We already have commitments from 3 regional hospitals to participate in the medical alert dog training program. The foundation had been Robert's idea, born during long nights at Sophie's hospital bedside. Sophie's Angels would train rescue dogs as medical alert companions for children with neurological conditions, while also providing education to medical facilities about incorporating service animals into treatment protocols. The settlement funds had provided initial financing, with ongoing support pledged by several pharmaceutical companies eager for the positive publicity. The training facility renovations at the sanctuary are ahead of schedule, Sarah continued. We should be able to begin the pilot program with the first group of dogs and families by February. Jake nodded, making notes on his tablet. After months of legal uncertainty, Judge Gardner had officially dismissed the parole violation charges against him, citing extraordinary public service and heroic intervention. Now employed as the foundation's operations director, Jake had found purpose in combining his medical background with newly discovered skills in program development and advocacy. Chief Wilson called this morning, he mentioned, scrolling through his notes. When? Where? The department's approved Dakota's reduced schedule 20 hours monthly rather than weekly, primarily for community outreach and special events. That leaves him available for the demonstration components of our training program. Their conversation paused as the back door opened, admitting Sophie in her wheelchair, pushed by Melissa. Dakota followed attentively, his alert posture relaxed but vigilant. She did wonderfully today, Melissa reported, gathering her materials. Speech clarity is improving consistently and sentence complexity is increasing. The neuroplasticity we're observing is remarkable, exactly what Dr. Montgomery predicted given Sophie's age and the specialized rehabilitation protocols. After Melissa's departure, the family settled in the living room, where adaptations had been made for Sophie's ongoing recovery needs. The space reflected their new reality, medical equipment discreetly integrated alongside family photographs, therapy schedules posted next to Sophie's artwork, Dakota's specialized equipment stored in a custom cabinet. I have something for you, Sophie, Robert said, retrieving a small box from his desk. It arrived this morning. Sophie opened the package carefully, her movements deliberate but increasingly coordinated after months of occupational therapy. Inside lay a custom-made medallion attached to a blue ribbon, engraved with Dakota's name and the words "Extraordinary Service Beyond Duty." "The governor is presenting it officially at next month's ceremony," Robert explained. "But they sent this replica for you to keep." Sophie smiled, the expression coming more naturally now than the labored attempts of early recovery. "Dakota deserves it," she said carefully. "He didn't give up." None of them needed to articulate the deeper truth they had learned through this journey, that the bonds connecting them transcended conventional understanding, that loyalty and love could manifest in forms both human and canine, that second chances sometimes arrived in unexpected packages. That evening, after Sophie had been settled for the night, with Dakota maintaining his customary position beside her bed, Robert and Jake sat on the back deck, watching stars emerge in the clear November sky. "Jennifer would be proud," Robert said quietly, breaking the companionable silence, "of Sophie's fight, of what you did, of the foundation." Jake nodded, emotion still difficult territory after years of suppressing them. "She always saw the best in people, in me, even when I couldn't see it myself." "Sophie has that same quality," Robert observed. "The ability to recognize something valuable in the overlooked and broken." They both knew he was referring to more than just Dakota, to Jake's own journey from estranged brother-in-law to essential family member, to Robert's transformation from grieving widower to passionate advocate, to the community that had rallied around them in ways neither could have anticipated. The following morning brought the first snowfall of the season, blanketing Rivercrest in pristine white. Sophie insisted on bundling up for a brief excursion to the backyard, where Dakota bounded joyfully through untouched drifts while she directed proceedings from her wheelchair. "Look, Daddy," she called, pointing toward Dakota's tracks in the snow. "He's making a heart." Robert watched as the German Shepherd circled back, indeed creating a pattern that resembled a heart around Sophie's wheelchair. Whether by chance or design hardly mattered, the symbolism was perfect either way. As Dakota returned to Sophie's side, pressing his warm body against her wheelchair with devoted attention, Robert captured the moment with his camera. This image would soon grace the homepage of the Sophie's Angels Foundation website, becoming the emblem of their mission: a girl once declared dead, a dog once abandoned, and the extraordinary bond that had saved them both. In the story that would spread far beyond Rivercrest, inspiring similar programs across the country and eventually around the world, the most powerful element wasn't the medical miracle or the dramatic rescue. It was the simple, profound truth that Dakota had recognized: when all human expertise had failed, sometimes the faintest heartbeat is strong enough to sustain the greatest love. In a world that often dismisses the wisdom of age and the intuition that comes from years of experience, Sophie's story reminds us that sometimes the deepest truths aren't visible to sophisticated equipment or medical degrees. Dakota, a creature many would overlook, recognized what highly trained professionals couldn't. Just as this loyal shepherd refused to abandon Sophie, we too must honor the unspoken bonds that sustain us through our darkest hours. As we navigate our golden years, we understand something profound about loyalty and persistence that younger generations are still learning. We know that love doesn't always arrive in expected packages or speak in familiar languages. Sometimes it comes with 4 paws and unwavering devotion. Sometimes it appears in the form of second chances we never thought possible. Sophie's journey teaches us that even when others have given up, when science has declared defeat, something miraculous can still happen if we just refuse to walk away. The faintest heartbeat can indeed sustain the greatest love. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.